last evening. Sable had stared at her in disbelief. Her anger flared as she held Sally's triumphant eyes. But Sable knew her feelings would make no difference. In the end, only numbness remained, a numbness that gripped her still. Now, watching the sunset, Sable stood on the wide front porch contemplating her future. She felt someone step out onto the porch behind her and knew without turning that it was Mavis. "How are you, little sister?" Mavis asked softly. In spite of Sable's mood, the salutation made her smile. The half-sisters had been born less than 6 minutes apart, and Mavis never let Sable forget who'd drawn breath first. Sable's love for her knew no bounds, but contemplating Mavis's query made the numbness return. As well as can be expected, I suppose. How about you? Sable turned and peered into the face that in many ways mirrored her own. Mavis's brown eyes were red-rimmed and swollen as she confessed, "I can't stop crying." Sable turned away. She ached too, but knew tears were a waste of time. They would not alter her fate. Mavis announced bitterly, "I told Mama I'll never speak to her again if she goes through with this sale, but she won't change her mind." Sable didn't expect Sally Ann to relent. The mistress of the household had never hidden her dislike for Sable, mostly because of what the bronze-skinned, green-eyed Sable represented. Sable's mother, a slave woman named Azelia, had given birth to Sable 6 minutes after Sally Ann gave birth to Mavis. Both baby girls had been fathered by Sally Ann's husband, Carson Fontaine, just as he'd fathered Sable's older brother Raimond and Mavis's brother Andrew 2 years earlier. Mavis interrupted Sable's thoughts. "I'll help however I can." Sable knew she would. Though society forced the two women to walk in different worlds, making one mistress and the other slave, they'd shared everything all their lives. When Mavis had lost her beloved husband, Sanford, 6 months into the war, Sable had held her while she cried. Mavis stepped around to look into Sable's eyes. "I know you're thinking of running, but there must be another way. The roads aren't safe." "Safer than having Henry Morse as a master?" Sable retorted. Rumors surrounding Morse's treatment of his female slaves linked him to at least 2 mysterious deaths that had taken place last year. The local constabulary had eventually charged a young male slave on a neighboring plantation with the killings, but most people, black and white, questioned the validity of the official findings. The slave had been hanged as punishment in spite of protestations from his owner, who loudly proclaimed his man's innocence. Mavis spoke again. "Well, if you do decide to run, don't worry. I'll make certain Matty's cared for." In spite of Mavis's assurances, Sable did worry. Since receiving Sally Ann's news, the fate of Sable's great-aunt had been weighing heavily on Sable's already overburdened shoulders. Matty had been captured by European slavers and brought to America at the tender age of 8. Now, over 60 years later, she appeared destined to die without ever seeing her homeland again. She had been ill for some time, and although Sable knew Mavis would do everything in her power to make Matty comfortable until the end, Sable could not leave her. It would break her heart. Were Sable's brother Raimond there, maybe the two of them could concoct a plan to secure Matty's safety. But 2 years ago, Raimond had gone off to war to serve as personal valet to Andrew, Mavis's older brother. No one had heard a word from either man since then. So Matty's future remained unsettled. Sable didn't want her aunt to die without a final farewell caress from Sable's hand to ease the passage home. 6 weeks ago, she'd been given a chance to escape with the Fontaines' head butler and driver, Otis, but she'd declined because of Matty's health. Otis had forged himself a pass, borrowed the last working carriage the Fontaines owned, and driven himself to freedom. With him, he'd taken his wife Opal, who'd been the Fontaines' cook and head housekeeper for over 30 years, and their 15-year-old daughter Ophelia, the kitchen maid. Sally Ann had thrown a fit upon finding them gone, but Sable had smiled inwardly, hoping they'd reach freedom safely. Sable had been a slave all her life and dearly wanted to be free, but she wouldn't leave unless she could take her aunt, too.